So good morning, everyone. It's a little bit lighter audience than yesterday. It sounds like everyone had a really good night last night at the drinks. That's part of ecosystem building. Anyway, today I'm going to talk about, I've been in London the last 20 years, and I'm going to talk about my experience about what I've seen as London has grown to be one of the largest ecosystems in Europe and certainly around the world. We're nowhere near where Silicon Valley is, but we're certainly en route. And as Summer said, you know, we don't want to be like a Silicon Valley. We are our own city with our own specialities. So I thought I'd start with, there we go, if we click it, infamous Brad Feld and the Boulder thesis, because this is actually a really good place to start and a really good example of how one very powerful ecosystem was built around Boulder. And what he said is that there are sort of four main components for building an ecosystem. First and foremost, it's the leaders. And he classified the leaders as people that are the entrepreneurs. So people like you in the audience that are the founders. And from there, we've got the feeders. And the feeders are everybody else in the ecosystem. The community builders, the advisors, the corporates, everybody else who are surrounding the leaders and helping create that ecosystem. And I think the one thing he called out here, it's a long-term commitment. It's over 20 years to get there. And certainly those are the kind of things that we're seeing in places like Silicon Valley. The community. I think this is very important, and I've actually had a great 2 days seeing how all of you as a community work. I think the thing to say here is it's an inclusive community. Everybody is welcome, everybody contributes, everybody pays it forward. And it's the community surrounding the leaders and the feeders that are really pulling that kind of ecosystem there. And then the final component is continual engagement. So it's not just you come in for these 2 days of ZEST, for example. You've got to be at it the other 364 days a year. It's continuous engagement. And I'll sort of explain how these four have transpired and what happens in London. Quick quote, I love this. It's the magic of the community. I won't read it to you, but just give you a couple of seconds to read that. And for me, this is the most important thing. It's about building bridges and relationship building. Every time I come to a conference like this, I make very new connections, very new friendships, and it's people that know that I can be the bridge to somewhere like London and some of the work that I've been doing across Europe. It's about relationships, and every single one of you in this room are, you know, it's up to you to build these kind of relationships. So diving more deeply, what's happening in Europe? I've had the privilege of sitting on the advisory board of Startup Europe, actually with Karia, who spoke yesterday on ICOs. And over the last 2 years, it's a European Commission initiative where they funded 9 projects, and the premise of those projects were 4 cities, 4 countries, create a project and learn how to collaborate. And it was actually quite an amazing exercise. So if you go to their website, startupeuropeclub.eu, you can see this is June 2017, just like a synopsis of the events that are going on around Europe. I've lost track of how many cities, but this portal is a really good place for you to go and find out what's happening in different parts of Europe. And there's Kairi. And here's an example of data. I love my data, but this is to give you an example of the scale of, this is 2016 data of what's happening right now in Europe in the innovation ecosystem. I think for me, 4.52 million employees around Europe focused on what we are all in the room focusing on. I've also recently had the privilege of joining the high-level group of advisors for the European Innovation Council, and that's actually working very closely with the European Innovation Minister, Carlos Moedas, on bringing this ecosystem to the next level over the next 5 years. So this, I'd like to do this slide in about 3 years' time just to see where we're at. This is just the beginning. So this is my take on an innovation ecosystem. I think it consists of 8 core parts, and at any one point in time, the ecosystem, the innovation ecosystem, will have strengths in some countries, in some parts, strengths in countries in other parts. But sort of in a nutshell, we have entrepreneurs, the grassroots and community builders, universities, investors, government, accelerators, corporates, and advisors. And that's me, I'm one of the advisors. But to put that in, the leaders and feeders, in my view, are the entrepreneurs and the community grassroots. And the rest are the feeders, just to give you an idea of how you can break that down into core components. So what's happening in London? I'll go through this very quickly. I think I'm going to look at London from the last 10 years. So maybe we're in year 10 of a 20-year cycle. But back when I launched my business in London, which is now known as Microsoft Ventures, back then it was Microsoft Startup Accelerator, Microsoft BizSpark is what it was called back then. But I call this period the seeds are sown. And what I saw were a lot of entrepreneurs working alone, a lot of grassroots and community builders doing sort of developer meetups, again, alone, and universities doing a lot of stuff alone. And they were starting at this point in time to work together. So I saw entrepreneur communities come together and CEOs actually sit together and have networking drinks so that they could learn that their journey was not just them. I saw grassroots and community builders in East London in particular. So this was before Silicon Roundabout in London, if you haven't heard about it, became sort of almost world famous. This was, they were already there. They were already doing stuff. And the universities were always building technologies, always privatizing technologies and commercializing them. And at that period in time, some very interesting things. The investors and corporates were also there, but less so. And when I say corporates, I call out folks like AWS. So Amazon was there giving server tools and time to technology companies. Microsoft, when I was there, we launched the startup program. And IBM in about 2010 launched their startup program. So you're seeing more the platform companies getting involved, but very, very light touch. Ditto with investors. The investors were around from 2000 onwards. So a lot of the Accels, indexes, they've always been around, but they were just continually investing, but not at the scale that we're seeing today. 2010 to 2012 in London, it was starting to take shape. And what I would call out here is particularly the government box. Now, the government box to me is very interesting. This is when Prime Minister Cameron and his special advisors created this initiative called Tech City UK. And that was actually putting a shape on something that was already happening in the previous part. And they coined it Silicon Roundabout, because it was the old street roundabout in East London. The startups were already there. They're already co-working with each other. It was already happening. The community meetups were happening. But government started to not step in, but they started to get involved. And around that period of time, we were looking at things like the entrepreneur visa. I think that came out in 2012. The whole angel policies that I know were mentioned in the panel yesterday with Tuche, that the SEIS, so this was an enterprise investment scheme where new angels were given tax breaks. And that's just created a whole new angel ecosystem. So the government was actually putting policies in place because they could see this was an up-and-coming sector. From a corporate perspective, what I'd say here is corporates like Telefonica launched the Wyra Accelerator in mid-2012. Google actually launched Campus in 3 or 4 parts of Europe in 2012. I jumped into Silicon Valley Bank in about early 2013, but in 2012, Silicon Valley Bank got their British banking license in London because they could see such a huge opportunity in Europe. 2010 to 2012, taking shape. What I would call out here, the light gray boxes, advisors and accelerators and co-working. A lot more accelerators were popping up in London. It's a very interesting time. All of them were local, but this is around the time that WeWork started to think about things. 2013 to 2014, hypergrowth. All of a sudden, all the boxes are there. We've got great companies, the beginning of the unicorns. We've got amazing grassroots and community initiatives. I don't know if any of you have heard about this meetup called the Three Beards, but they started to do things like Silicon Drink About. The universities were actually starting to launch interesting curriculum. More and more investors were coming into the game. Advisors were starting to offer packages specially focused on this ecosystem. 2015 to present, and I call this the age of unicorns and scale-ups. And just to give you an idea of what I'm seeing, it's absolutely insane what's happening now in London. We've got the entrepreneurs. They're the rock stars, right? They're the ones creating the billion-dollar companies. I personally hate the word unicorn, but we've got so many of those. We've created specialities in London, somewhere like fintech, for example, which is what I'm hoping to see would happen here in Malta. We're very good in ad tech and marketing tech. We're very good in fashion tech, retail tech. So London was getting into very deep dive in specialities. Events every single night in London. There are times where I have to go from one event to another to another. You'll see up to 3 events every night. Universities have an entrepreneur curriculum now in London and other parts of Europe. I've had the privilege of lecturing at about 4 London universities, which is great, and it's all masters in entrepreneurship. It's cool to be an entrepreneur. This data is out of date now. 60 brand new funds and counting. So we call this segment emerging VC. And these are first-time or second-time funds. Actually, at last count in London and certain parts of Europe, I saw about 100 new funds. So a lot of people are raising money, and they are continuing to invest. Government, what's really cool is I'm not just seeing national, I'm seeing the Mayor of London, and I'm seeing local boroughs as well. Accelerators, too many to name. Excuse me, I need to grab a water. 100 at last count. Look at the numbers. What laughs at me? It's the conditioning. Pardon that. Maybe I can get people here to finish it for me. But read the numbers. That's all I'm going to tell you. Average salary is £61,000. 7,500 startups born last year. And turnover is 56 billion just in London. But I spoke to Jen yesterday, and I love this. It's true, because literally 5 years ago, you could not find a good burrito in London, at all. And literally now, every 10 meters, you can find a really, really good burrito. But people were obsessed, and the Silicon Valley folk will really get this. But actually, it's true. And this is an article in Esquire in May this year. So we love our burritos, and London's going for it. So let's see if this happens in Malta. I'm not sure burritos work here, but I think it's great. But I'll finish with this. I'm worried about London. What's going to happen with Brexit? And I think this is a real opportunity for you in Malta. Sorry, guys. I'll just finish with that. EIF has stopped funding at least 6 funds in London. And the question is, can the UK government step up post-Brexit to really continue the amazing growth of this ecosystem? I actually think we'll be okay. I think particularly in London, we just go as we go and we just carry on executing. But I do worry. And what I can say to you as an ecosystem in Malta, I think this is a real opportunity for you to step up and look at where you can contribute to a lot of companies in London around Brexit. Thank you very much.